For today, the book of Revelation. We're going to plunge in with some questions about what do you know about this book? How do you approach reading this book, if you've ever read it? What is the lens or the perspective that you employ when you read this dramatic and different book? So I'm just going to let you talk to one another in some smaller groups about how do you come to this distinctive document.
So I'm going to pop you all into breakout rooms. How long? We'll just give you a few minutes for this one.
Yeah.
While you just canvass what you think of Revelation. So I'm opening the rooms now. What do you think you know or don't know about the book of Revelation?
We don't know.
More know than I know.
We don't know, yes.
Don't know. Nobody has an opinion on Revelation?
I'd scrub it from the Bible.
Scrub it from the Bible.
That's a good
Okay,
idea.
class is finished. We'll see you next year.
No, the comment is,
I'm
It's
certainly
interesting
looking
you-
forward to the Old Testament.
You actually have a point there, Piers, because this book was hotly debated about whether it would make it into the canon. And the East
Yes.
and the West were really divided on this.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
East and Western churches about whether it should actually be in the canon, with one in favour and one not in favour. So it probably just got in by the skin of its teeth.
Which one Elizabeth was in favour of keeping it?
I believe the Western Church. I think the Eastern Church objected to it.
That's right, yes.
I'll have to become Greek Orthodox. Sorry.
I'm not quite sure what their precise objection was, but they didn't see it having a place in the canon. So there was quite, as I said, a heated debate about whether or not it should be even in our Bibles. Anything else?
Can
People
I
want
pass on a word of prophecy that we were given 70 years ago by an American evangelist called Hyman Appleman, who we did a study in Revelation. He said, well, at the end of the time, he said, well, on that great and glorious day when the billions are up there worshipping the Lamb, he said, I'll be up there somewhere down the back with the hoi polloi. He said, and it won't matter whether you're a premillennial or a post-millennial or whatever you are.
Yeah, right.
No one, I prophesy, will be able to turn to his neighbour and say, I told you so.
Right. I'm not sure that's entirely helpful, but anyway, nothing else about Revelation. How has Revelation been used? Did any of you talk about that?
well, we actually just said either we read it, don't want to go into it because it's just too, yeah, it's too dark almost. We don't want to face some of the stuff.
Well,
It is
I
very
actually-
dark.
I did go
Before
into it before I was a Christian because it was kind of dark. Because I was into all the Gothic sort of stuff back then, and that book fascinated me. And I have to say, over the years, I've come back to it each time with different eyes and a different approach. So my approach now would be very different to back then. But you know, it's never been a book which I feel anyone can fully understand. I mean, I just don't think it's possible.
It's probably not as cryptic as you think. It's like one of these things that if you crack the code, you can actually decipher much of what it's telling you.
Okay.
It's just couched in language that's highly colourful, symbolic, and very flamboyant.
Right.
But it does have things underneath it that are quite straightforward to understand.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the Christian church, in my experience, has used Revelation as an excuse not to care for the earth in a way, because everything's going to be passed to nothing.
Yeah.
It's fairly violent in places as well, of course. But
It certainly is. It's very violent in places. And the plagues and some of the other things that are put upon the earth are really, truly terrible things. So
I don't want to be around when that happens.
Well,
be
no,
gone.
no one would want to be around when Revelation hit the earth.
No.
I think the good news is it's probably not going to happen as it's literally described. So I'd like to set your minds at rest at
you don't have to flee to the
Yeah,
hills,
the other-
it's concerned.
flee to the hills and hide in the holes. No good.
What was
Sorry,
that, Derek?
I say we don't have to flee to the hills and hide in our holes. No,
Probably not.
good.
And if you do, it won't be because revelation is happening. It'll be some catastrophe we've brought upon ourselves.
Someone's let the nuclear weapons off or something. Yeah.
Something like that. That's right. And of course, this book has been abused for centuries from people claiming to have cracked its prophetic secrets. And they have predicted the end of the world for literally millennia.
Mm.
And happily, none of them have ever been right.
Mm.
We're still here.
Yeah.
But
So-
revelation is misused in that way.
No, I didn't wait on North Head in Sydney on December the 21st, was it, in 1939, waiting for Christ to sail in through the harbour? No.
No, it's probably not a good idea to be sitting there. Well, revelation is among the genre, the biblical genre we call apocalyptic. And apocalyptic is a transliteration. That means we take the letters from the Greek and just pop them into English. And it's from apocalypus, which just means to reveal or unveil something. So that's why we talk about a revelation as something sort of revealed to us. And revealed, of course, is the verbal form of that word. So it's in this genre. An apocalyptic genre has certain striking characteristics about it. It's quite otherworldly. It's full of a lot of symbolism. It's usually predicting the end of something, generally the world. And it kind of works to help people who may be under persecution find some kind of hope. So the genre seems to arise out of those particular circumstances.
So if you look on page 144 and 145 of your books, you can see on 144 we've got quotes from a couple of Old Testament professors, few definitions of more technical definitions, if you like, of apocalyptic. And on page 145, we thought that it was worth just noting the amount of apocalyptic literature that exists in the Jewish world. Now, some parts of the prophets start to become quite apocalyptic in nature. So there are some chapters towards the end of the first part of Isaiah. There's an element of apocalyptic in Jeremiah and certainly in Ezekiel, in Joel, in Zechariah. So you can read those chapters alongside of Revelation and see how there are similarities. The whole book of Daniel, the fourth of the major prophets, is an apocalyptic work. Daniel is believed to have been written about 2 centuries before the time of Jesus, soon after Antiochus IV, known as Antiochus Epiphanes, desecrated the temple in Jerusalem. He erected a statue of Zeus, that pagan god, right in the middle of the temple. And so that led to the uprising against the Seleucids led by the Maccabees. Now, the book of Daniel is actually set 4 centuries earlier during the Babylonian captivity, and it tells the story of Daniel, a Jew in the exile. But it was prompted, it's believed, by those apocalyptic kind of events in the years 175 to 167, the desecration of the temple and then the uprising of the Maccabees. But around this time and onwards, there's other Jewish literature that's been written that's quite apocalyptic in nature. The book of Enoch, which has actually got 5 different sections to it, probably written by an anonymous Jew citing or drawing on the name of Enoch. And even though it's Jewish, it's got images from Greek mythology. The book of Daniel, the book of Jubilees. There's the 3rd book of a work known as the Sibylline Oracles. The Sibyl was, of course, a Greek pagan figure, and yet the Jews, some Jews, adopted the figure of the Sibyl and had her speaking oracles related to Jewish in Jewish ways. There's a book called The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, the Psalms of Solomon, the Testament of Moses, the Martyrdom of Isaiah. Now, nobody believes that those figures actually wrote those books, but once again, this is the kind of drawing on the name of an ancient venerated figure to give the work authority. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are quite a lot of apocalyptic writings, and the scrolls that were discovered in the middle of last century, which date to probably from the 2nd century through BCE through to the 1st century of the Common Era. There's one scroll known as the War Scroll, which describes in great detail the final end time battle between the forces of good and evil. There's in the scrolls, there's the life of Adam and Eve, also known as the Apocalypse of Moses. There's the Testament of Abraham, and there's the 2nd book of Enoch, the book of the secrets of Enoch. And then there are other works that are listed down there that in Christianity. So not only is John attributed as writing an apocalypse, the one we're looking at today, but so also is Peter. And there's a book called The Shepherd of Hermas, which is very apocalyptic. And there are apocalypses attributed to Abraham and Baruch, and again Sybil, which have Jewish and Christian elements. So you can see that this was a whole growth industry in the ancient world of apocalyptic writing. And Revelation is but one of many books. Now, one of the
Doesn't Jude, or is it Jude that quotes from Enoch?
Yes, Jude quotes from Enoch,
Yeah.
yes, which is not part of the Old Testament, but was a Jewish document in existence. Yeah, that's right. Now, after the opening part of the opening chapter of Revelation, we get a series of letters. And if I could just draw your attention to page 148, and you can see on the slide, the letters were to 7 churches in what we know today as Turkey, but in the ancient world, the whole area was known as Asia Minor, and there were different regions or provinces, Caria, Lydia, and Mysia, others. So the 7 churches, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Ephesus was the capital of the region, and the others were significant cities in those regions. And in the case of these letters, unlike the letters we were looking at last week, these letters rigorously adhering to a strict letter form. So it's like they were done on a computer that just has fill in the blanks at certain spots. They all start the same way and move through in the same pattern and end in the same way. So you can see the pattern of the letters set out on page 148. An address to the angel of the church in, the city is named. These are the words of him who, and then there's some description, some apocalyptic description of Christ. And then there is a statement, I know what's going on in your church. And that leads, that is, the letters each have a very particular description. And then as a criticism of what's going on, you have abandoned your first love in Ephesus. You are enswayed to the slander of a synagogue of Satan in Smyrna. There are some in Pergamum who hold to the teachings of Balaam. You tolerate that woman Jezebel in Thyatira. You are dead in Sardis. You have but little power in Philadelphia. And the Laodiceans, you are neither hot nor cold, just lukewarm. So in each case, there's serious problems going on in the particular city addressed. So there is a warning that they need to repent. And then an exhortation, let anyone who has an ear listen to what I'm saying. And then there's the final promise, to the one who conquers, life will be given. So you can see that if you look at those 7 letters, they're very formulaic, very systematic, and very incisively critical of the situation in each of those places. Now, that part of the book of Revelation seems, in a sense, easier to handle because it's using a form that we're very familiar with, the letter form, and it's quite formulaic. But what happens after that explodes into a whole new world. There in heaven, a door stood open. and we're going to think about what is here in the rest of the book of Revelation.
On page 146 of your books, you'll notice there's an overview of Revelation there. After the scene is set with the various churches of Revelation and a big scene of worship about what's happening in heaven around God and the Lamb, you have a series of events that happen that heavily feature the number 7. Except that I don't know why there isn't 7 horsemen of the apocalypse, actually, because that would fit better. But you have these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and they unleash this series of violence, famine, and death on the earth, and they wreak havoc. And they come from a vision in Zechariah. And the 5th reveals the souls who have been slaughtered for the word of God, and they're the martyrs. But we have 7 angels and 7 seals and 7 trumpets and 7 bowls and 7 plagues. And all of these are harbingers of the end of the world. In case you missed the point, we repeat these cycles of 7 to make sure that everyone happens. And there's very dramatic images. There's the fall of Babylon, and we'll talk a little bit more about Babylon and who that is. And then the idea that the devil will be defeated and a new heaven and earth will be formed, and the new earth descends from heaven down to where the old earth was. So it's a very colourful book, and it sets a scene for what is normally called in Jewish literature as the Day of the Lord, but it does it in great detail, and it pays a lot of attention to people who've been martyred as being Christian. So we can assume from that at this time there was much persecution involving death and terrible torment among the Christian people, because the book of Revelation picks that up at quite a number of points and talks about those people being in heaven waiting for, in a sense, vengeance. It's like a justice, but it's also vengeance on those who brought those things against us. And we have several figures that appear. There's Babylon, the mother of whores, and there's the beast and other figures that appear that people have interpreted in a different way throughout history. And then after the new heaven and earth, it ends with some closing words about what it is and that you can't add to it or take away from it, and it is what it is, and woe betide you if you don't take notice of it, basically. So that's the book of Revelation. I mean, it's longer than what I'm summarising here, but that gives you an idea of what is going on in it. So what is going on in the book of Revelation? Well, there's lots of dramatic flourishes in this book at the start and at the end. And so we're going to ask you, when you think about such things and how dramatic it is about angels and horsemen and bowls of wrath and plagues and pestilence and famine, what impact does this have on the way you read Revelation? And we're going to pop you into your breakout rooms again for 5 minutes to just have a quick discussion about that. So what impact does that happen on you?
So we were joined by Dorothea and Patricia.
Yeah, I've got them in.
Which Patricia is it? Do you know?
My Patricia.
Right.
Jessen.
Yeah.
I'll just